Welcome in, everyone. Most of us are taught that certainty is a virtue, that the strongest people are the ones who never doubt, never question, never change their minds. But what happens when the life you've built around certainty no longer feels true? When the answers that once held you together start to fall apart, and pretending becomes more painful than leaving. Today's guest spent decades inside faith, leadership, and community. Building an identity rooted in belief, purpose, and belonging. But slowly, questions emerged that couldn't be ignored, and choosing honesty came with a cost. Relationships, reputation, and the loss of a life that once made perfect sense. This is a conversation about doubt, courage, and what it means to rebuild a life when certainty is gone, but integrity remains. This is the best mistake David Hayward ever made. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today, David. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on your show. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of just wanted to start off, tell us a little bit about your story. Obviously, I know you spent 30 plus years in ministry and really had a full upbringing in that side of things. So tell us a little bit about your life prior to kind of the transformation and leaving your pastoral role.
Yeah, so I'd been in the ministry for, like you said, about 30 years, pastoring churches, and before that I'd been in the church pretty much my entire life. So my entire existence really, not just my vocation, but my entire life, my existence, all my relationships and where I derive my sense of meaning and purpose and everything was wrapped up in the church, Christianity in particular. And so when I was pastoring churches of all different kinds, I finally came to the place when I realized I could no longer continue in that box. That if I wanted to continue growing, it meant leaving that container. And, I'd been through that before many, many times where I realized, the only way I'm going to be able to continue to grow is to change my life and the circumstances I was in. But this one felt, the last time I did that in 2010, there was a huge decision because it felt like I was finally leaving that container for good. Before I'd left it for periods of time and came back, new and improved. But this time I knew that leaving at this time was a kind of a permanent step and that there'd be no going back.
And for those of you who are interested in kind of the full story, of all your books, had to pick one that I wanted to read just to get a little bit of context and think through. And I have the questions or the answer book is what I went with, which not only is an amazing story, amazingly written, it's a great way to kind of learn about your background, but the illustrations in here are part artist, part philosopher, in my mind, I feel like, and really, really wonderful. I think my favorite is, even though it's early on, probably the one with the kid at school, presumably, who says, we'll give him another chance. Hopefully you can straighten him out soon. And it's the picture of, obviously, the child is a question mark and everyone is exclamation. And that's such an interesting take on things. As someone who myself grew up Presbyterian and did a lot of church work throughout college and started seminary and actually decided to step aside from it in my career as well. So just the story
Wow.
really resonated with me a lot.
Wow. Yeah. 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 I went through that period where I developed these characters based on question marks and exclamation marks. And so the kid shaped like a question mark, obviously full of curiosity, has a lot of questions, and the teacher wants to straighten him out, make him an exclamation mark, which for me symbolizes certainty, and so yeah, that's interesting. I was actually, even though I began in the Anglican church, ended up in the Baptist church and went through the Pentecostal church and went to a Pentecostal Bible college and an evangelical seminary. I actually ended up getting ordained Presbyterian. And, so I was into Reformed theology too. And so I was all over the map, really.
I mean, it sounds like you explored that side of life, even when you maybe felt a little more certain there. You
Yeah.
you transversed both Canada and the U.S. and then back to Canada. I'm curious what brought you to Bible college in Missouri, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that I at the time I was a teenager in Canada, in a Pentecostal church. I was Pentecostal, and I wanted to go to a college or university. And so the only thing available at that time in Canada was like a diploma. So
Mm,
I wanted a full BA. I wanted a
got it.
bachelor's degree. And that was only available to me for a Bible college. That was only available in the United States. And at the time, I was actually applying to be a music major. So I actually started Bible college as a music major. And Gordon, uh, Central Bible College in Springfield, Missouri was pretty well known for its music program. So that's why I ended up going there, all the way down from Canada, which, I'm really glad I did because that's where I met my wife and, you know, to whom I'm still married after all these years. So that was a fortuitous decision.
That's awesome. Do you come from a religious family or any pastoral line there?
No, not really. My dad was a cop, and but he was very religious, spiritual. Like um, like I said, he came from England, so he was Church of England or Anglican in Canada. And when I was born, that's what I was. I was baptized Anglican, um, but he was kind of all over the map too. And we moved a lot because of his job being a policeman. And so we ended up going to whatever church was closest or the best or most interesting or whatever. And so we were never faithful to any one denomination until um, we uh, went to the Baptist church. We lasted there for about a year. And we ended up in the Pentecostal church, and that's where we stayed for such a long time. And in fact, my mom and dad, and pretty much until they passed away, would have considered themselves Pentecostal. Yeah.
It's always interesting when people hop around to different denominations because they're all similar in many ways, but have their own flavor, I guess, or their own spices to the mix. What
Yeah.
so your first long time? I mean, 30 years is a long time to kind of be in a role aside from whatever job it is. 30 years is a long time to kind of be in a type of industry and doing very similar things. You had to have found it rewarding, I assume, for a good chunk of those 30 years to some extent.
Well, it was bittersweet. I always struggled with being in the ministry.
Mm,
It was never my goal or intention. I kind of ended up there accidentally, actually. So, like I said, I started my BA as a music major. And then I met Lisa, and we could not figure out how she wanted to be a missionary. And so how does that work? A music minister or a
mm,
pastor and a missionary. And so I very quickly decided to change majors to Bible and theology, to make our lives more compatible. And so then I ended up becoming a Bible and theology major and we got married. And then I went on for my master's at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary near Boston. And I continued on my biblical studies and got my master's in biblical studies there and focusing on New Testament. So I got biblical Greek, biblical Hebrew. And then from there, I was going to start my PhD in New Testament studies. I wanted to be a Bible scholar. And I actually started my PhD program at University of Toronto when we found out half into the program that that she was pregnant, and we couldn't afford going moving on. It's very expensive to take a PhD, and I was offered a student charge as a Presbyterian student, and I took it. And so I was given two little country churches to take care of, and they gave me a place to stay, and I could continue my studies and get the equivalent of a Master of Divinity and then be ordained after that. And so it was almost like I was given an escape hatch, but it involved being a pastor. And so I actually ended up in the ministry very much by accident. And so all the way through my ministry, even though I felt like I could do my spiritual searching and exploration and theological studies and everything there, I always struggled with being in the ministry because I always felt um, uh, uh, very controlled, you know, not not overtly or
Yeah.
intentionally. I just felt like when you're a pastor, all eyes are on you, and you have to be a certain way, and there's certain expectations and everything, which I really chafe against. But that sort of came with the that was just part of the deal. Like, so I could continue my spiritual growth and theological studies and all that, but here's the deal: you have to be a pastor, and so I I did the best I could. I feel I was a decent pastor, and I took care of people, and did all that I needed to do as a pastor, while at the same time continuing my own personal spiritual growth.
How did it feel before we obviously the big transition or the obvious transition going from pastoral work into the, I'm going to call it philosophical artist work and all of the great parts of it. How did it feel? So, academic study of anything, really, you read a lot of texts, you're doing in depth analysis. Do you feel like that started some of your questioning that kind of led to a lot of different things through your pastoral work, just that academic approach?
No. Uh,
Fair.
yeah, I mean, partly, yeah, of course. Like when you're reading and you're reading spiritual texts or
Mm.
theological texts or whatever, your curiosity gets aroused and you follow that rabbit hole. But for me, mostly they were traumatic events in my life that um sort of goaded me into figuring out what happened. And so that's more what my life was like. So if you want, would you like me to give you an example?
Yeah, if you don't mind
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah. So I was after my master's in New Testament studies, I was offered a position as an assistant pastor in a big Presbyterian church in Canada, and I took the job. And it was a large Presbyterian church, largest Presbyterian church in Canada at that time. And so I was assistant to the minister, and I was quite young, like I was around 25 or something like that. And I was very gung ho. I was going to do the best. I was going to be the best, and so I built a very popular youth program, and you know, and I would preach once a month, and do visitation and all this kind of thing. And one snowy winter's day, it was like a Friday. We also had it was in a city, and so we had a pantry that we would give food out to unhoused people and so on. When they would come in and ask for help, we could give them food and stuff. So this one Friday, the secretary let me know that there was somebody at the door, and she was afraid of him. And he was asking for stuff kind of belligerently, and so I came out. I felt really kind of bothered. I was interrupted, and so I came out, and a snowstorm had started at the same time, like a very serious snowstorm. And it was Friday. It was getting later. It was getting darker. I wanted to get home because the chances were that this snowstorm was going to sock everybody in, like it was gonna we were going to be what they call snowbound. So and that we were going to be housebound for the weekend, and I wanted to get home before that started. And this guy was holding me up, and he was like uh, begging for food, and I could smell. Well, what I could smell was Listerine, like
Mm-hmm.
he not Listerine, Lysol, and he was high on Lysol, and I said, "You come back sober, and we'll talk business." And I kind of shoved him out the door, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so come back Monday or Tuesday, and we'll talk. You come back sober, and we'll talk. But I really treated him very unkindly, and he was going down the steps of the church, and he turned around, and just as clear as day, he said to me, "You'll never be a minister the way you treated me today." And it killed me. It absolutely killed me, because he just sort of that pierced through everything and devastated me. So I went home that weekend, and I was just overcome. Like I was just depressed. I was sad. I felt like a complete asshole. And uh, this guy had basically called me out, and I didn't know what to do, because I realized just how a shell of a man I was, you know, me pretending to be in the ministry and caring about people, and I treated him like that. Anyway, that evening, that Friday night, a friend of mine called from Boston. Now, I'd been down in Boston. That's where I got my master's. Had friends down there, and this guy called me from Boston. He said, "David, you never believe who I went to see today. Heard him speak." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Henry Nouwen." And it was amazing. And he going on and on. And we hung up the phone. I said, "Henry Nouwen, that rings a bell." And Lisa said, my wife, she said, "Didn't somebody give you a book by Henry Nouwen for a graduation gift?" And so we just moved basically, and all my books were still packed away. So I went looking through all of my boxes, and sure enough, there was a book by Henry Nouwen that a friend of mine gave me on graduation. It was called Reaching Out. And this friend of mine who gave me the book, he was into the spirituality program, and all that kind of mystic woo woo stuff. That was my attitude. Like, I was into biblical studies.
Mm-hmm.
He was into all that woo woo spirituality, mysticism
Yeah.
bullshit. And so I said, "Wow, that's kind of weird." So I read the book over the weekend, and it changed my life. It was just it absolutely changed my life. It was exactly what I needed at that moment in time. And from there, that turned me on to uh, like Thomas Merton, and other Christian mystic thinkers, as well as seeking out a spiritual director, which I eventually found. She was a nun, abbess of a monastery, a local monastery, who became my spiritual director. And so I'd gone from this completely uh, intellectual approach to spirituality and ministry, and theological approach, like in Reformed theology and blah, 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 all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, right? To what the heck happened? I realized all this theology and all this ministry, all this stuff didn't change me as a person. In fact, I was still the shell of a man who didn't care about others. And that event with that drunk guy completely overturned my life and completely changed my direction 180 degrees. And so that's basically how yeah, once in a while I'll read a book and it'll change my life or whatever, but usually it's a traumatic event that forces me to look inward and figure things out, you know? So
Yeah.
that's that's mostly my story. It may not be the way everybody does. Maybe a lot of people, like, they develop
Mm-hmm.
slowly, gradually through, reading and writing and so on. But for me, even though that does happen, for me, it's mostly traumatic events, cataclysmic turn of my life, you know?
How long elapsed between that foundational experience and actually eventually leaving the ministry itself chronologically?
Well, that was at the very beginning of my ministry.
Oh, wow, that was that long ago. Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. That was
Wow.
when I was very young. I was like around 25 or so.
Wow.
And that um, I'm a slow learner or something. Like I
It's fair.
like a lot of people. You and I we're both in the deconstruction kind of world.
Yeah.
A lot of people's deconstruction can happen overnight.
Mm.
Whereas for me, it's like I've got to figure this out. Okay, this is a huge light goes on, and it's like, okay, I got to figure this out. I'm not going to just dismiss everything that went before, and neither am I going to run back there and try to hold on to it. I got to figure out how to integrate this new experience and figure out how it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. So that's more my approach, and so that's why something that might happen to me way back then can take years to figure out. Um, so that's just my style. That's the way I do things.
No, it makes sense. And lots of this stuff takes time to settle into you, especially kind of coming out, I imagine, from the spiritual world where, or the religious world where sometimes there's lots of structure. I'm curious, what moment led to, that's at the beginning of your career. You've had this religious educational background. You're now working at a church in a couple of different ones in different ways. What event or decision really led to you, I don't want to say officially leaving, but moving from being a full-time pastor into a full-time artist, writer, philosopher, creative work after that?
So as things were progressing, and so my deconstruction started way back then. Like
Right.
when I graduated from seminary, actually, is when it began. And I compare it to a virus. Like corrupt code was implanted in my theological hard drive and just slowly corrupted my theological code in my brain. That's more like how it happened for me rather than an explosion. It
Mm.
was more like that slow glacial melt, that happened over time. And, very cautious, but very frustrating too, because it was taking so long and me trying to figure things out and make sense of it. And I was reading and I was meditating and I was writing in my journal and I was going to spiritual directors and I was talking to experts and gurus and everything, just trying to figure this out. And in 2009, I had this profound moment where suddenly some people compare it to a mushroom trip, like, and so, but it was not.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
was, I was completely sober. But I had this moment where everything came together. It was magical. It was like all of a sudden I saw the unity of all things and that all things are together and that connection, that interconnectedness and everything. And it was a profound moment that immediately I had peace of mind that I hadn't had all those years and that I sought for and that I was apparently promised. Peace I give unto you, not peace as the world gives, but
Yeah.
peace. And I was looking for that peace. And finally, I felt this peace of mind. All the theological angst just sort of melted away suddenly. And I felt immediately like I could take a deep breath and sigh. It was over. And it was a very peaceful, happy moment. And it stayed. It wasn't just, a moment in time. It was permanent. This peace of mind. I That was in 2009, and I started sharing my experience because I'm kind of a naive fellow, and I started sharing this stuff on my blog and everything, and I started hearing from others, my superiors were and peers were getting letters of concern about me, my theology, and and so on and so forth, and it was suggested I run everything through them first before and get their approval before I post it. And I knew, okay, uh, that I'm not going to do that. And I could feel the walls closing in, you know. And I find there was a meeting at our church with all the leaders, and we had a great leadership team, wonderful leadership team, but they were like, okay, let's rein this in, you know. And I knew, okay, I I won't be able to continue because this was really important to me. It was a life-changing moment, and it was real. And what I was hearing was we we don't understand you anymore. You've crossed the line, and we want to be able to control you and understand you and so on. And I knew my time is up. I could feel it. I could feel it. And I always, like I said before, I've always struggled with the ministry,
Hmm.
and I always struggled with my call in the ministry. And so I always wanted to know when was the perfect time to quit. And for me, it would be when it was best for me and best for the church. So when those intersected, that was when it was time for me to leave. And that moment happened. I could see it. Okay, it's best for me right now if I quit, and it's best for the church if I quit right now, so that they can continue on in their own way as they see fit. And you know, because if I stayed there, I would continue feeling resentful, and they would suffer, uh, you know, because I wasn't what they felt they needed. And so that was as clear as day. And so at the next meeting, I was like, I'm quitting. And even though I'd been there 15 years, and then you know, it wasn't long after that I was gone. 2010 is when I left the ministry and the church.
How did you feel like your family supported you there, whether it be wife, children? I'm just curious of how.
Well, by this time, my children were adults and totally supportive. My wife too. I mean, I
It's
remember
awesome.
leaving that meeting, and it was you know what? It's actually uh, 2010. It was 16 years ago today. It was March 9th. That's weird, man.
Wow,
It was
that's
March 9th when I walked out, and it was lightly snowing and there was a full moon. And I knew I was done. It was just as clear as day. And I texted Lisa. She's a nurse and she was working a night shift. And I texted her. I said, I'm done. And she's texted back, me too. So, you know, Lisa and I have always been together at the hip, you know,
Mhm.
always. After that, though, like theologically, deconstructing and so on, Lisa and I have been joined at the hip. Our the hardest part of our deconstruction was when we left the church. That changed our lives, right? It's one thing theologically, stuff going on in your head, but when you leave the church, our lives changed very, very dramatically and traumatically because, you know, I left my vocation, I left my paycheck, we left our support, we left our friends, we left our weekly activities, things to do, my sense of purpose, sense of meaning. So that was when our marriage went through the greatest strain, was after leaving the church, because it changes your life so much.
What made you pick up the pen? And I say that more on the artistic side. Obviously, assume you're creative and have always been creative in your interest originally to do the music portion of pastoral work. What made you start drawing? It's such an interesting
Oh,
outlet.
well, my father was an artist on the side, even though he was a policeman full time. He painted on the side, and so I was always around um, art being displayed and being made. So for me, it was very natural. I mean, I would sit down beside my dad and pick up a pencil and draw and pick up paint and paint. Like, and I was always doodling. And in school and everything, I would frequently get in trouble because I was doodling while the teacher was talking or whatever. And so it was just, something I did. And, it's amazing. We'll go to somebody's house or something and there's no art on the walls. Like, what is wrong? Something's wrong. I realize there's no art. To me, that's weird.
That's
But
hilarious.
I'm glad to see you got something hanging up behind you there.
I do
Uh,
actually. Yeah.
yeah. What's that?
Oh, I was just saying it's I raised it a little bit. It's the ship. So my great grandfather emigrated from Syria in 1901, and so it's the ship and manifest that he came over on back when he was 17 years old. So
Oh,
that's
wow.
that's my piece of art.
You're part Syrian.
Yeah, we're in modern day Lebanon. At the time
Lebanon, yeah.
was Syria. Yeah, which is where the last name Shaheen comes from.
Oh, okay, cool, man.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It. So I'm curious too. Like these pictures are beautiful. How did you feel when you started sharing them with others?
So when I started my blog, Naked Pastor, and the reason I call it Naked Pastor was
Yeah.
because everybody was blogging at the time. Pastors were blogging, and I thought, well, I'm going to be different by telling the truth. Like, I'm not going to just talk about the wonderful sermons and the wonderful fellowship and the wonderful Bible studies and the wonderful worship music and the wonderful coffee and donuts and potlucks. I'm going to talk about what really goes on in the life of a pastor and the life of the church, the fear, the conflict, the doubt, the financial struggles, the theological, whatever, conflict, everything. I was going to tell everything. That's why I called my blog Naked Pastor. And so at the time I was writing blog posts and sometimes illustrating them with paintings, because up to this point I hadn't been drawing cartoons. And so I think it was 2005 or six when I decided, like, I really love a good cartoon. And so I thought, let's try cartooning this stuff, see what happens. And I'd never drawn a cartoon. And so some of my first cartoons are just, I look back, I like cringe. But it started taking off. And so even though I'd been painting watercolors and drawing and things like that for my entire life, and I'd even sold paintings and things like that. This whole cartoon thing didn't start till like 2005 or six, like 20 years ago. And up to that point, Naked Pastor kind of was flying under the radar, but the cartoons started getting shared and passed around, and some of them went viral, and that's what started getting me in trouble, right? Started drawing attention to Naked Pastor, and yeah, it's been uphill or downhill from there, whatever angle you're looking at.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Did it feel vulnerable or did you feel how did you feel? I mean, sharing such a big moment of your life or big portion of your life, showing your, identity reevaluation and your deconstruction and all of that. I'm would love yeah, how did that feel for you?
Well, this is a interesting thing because I'm really a private kind of a person. I'm equal parts introvert extrovert,
Yeah.
maybe leaning more introvert, and I am kind of shy, and I hate conflict,
Mm.
and I love keeping the peace and so on. But you wouldn't be able to tell that from Naked Pastor, right? Because I seem to be stirring up the pot all the
Yeah.
time, causing arguments and everything. But for me, it's just pointing out what I think is true. So every day I'm risking exposing myself. I always feel that way. And it's like, should I press post or not? I don't know. Like, I'm not sure how this is going to go over or whatever. It's always like that. And the comments, whenever I say, okay, I got to look at the comments, it's painful because of all the vitriol that can be
Mm.
there. But in fact, I just sent out a letter to my subscribers this week talking about how every day I have to face this hatred and vitriol and stupidity and, you know, in the comments. And sometimes I really do wonder, what's the point? And, you know, is it worth it?
Yeah.
And then I hear from somebody, your cartoons literally saved my life. Okay, it's worth it then. If I'm saving lives, like literally, I'm not saying it, they're saying to me, you literally saved my life, or you saved the life of my trans daughter.
Mm.
What I showed them that, like, okay, then I'll take the heat if that's what it does, you know? So um yeah, every day it's scary, it's risky, uh and I feel like I'm exposing myself, you know, naked pastor, but it's so far it's been worth it because I really do feel, and from what I hear from other people is that I'm helping them, so it's worth it.
Absolutely. The good outweighs the hard, I
Yeah.
imagine, to some extent.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just because you mentioned it, um, if you had any journey with the LGBT community. As a gay man myself, growing up in the church was very interesting. Thankfully, the Presbyterian Church has always been fairly open minded about it. But how did that journey look like for you throughout time? Is it something you always kind of felt that you had your own feel for, or is it something that evolved?
I get asked this question a lot. So,
Okay.
um, and I didn't know you were gay, so I want to congratulate you.
Thank you.
And I'm on your side.
I
So
appreciate it.
it's I never felt judgmental towards gay people. I've always had gay people in my life, trans people in my life. I always felt compassion for them, and I never felt better than them. I always felt, and I could never understand how God could hate somebody who is obviously a better person than I am. You know, this kind of thing, right? But when I was in the ministry, there was sort of this dichotomy or binary way of thinking where, okay, here's here's Sam, my trans friend. Uh, she is a lovely person, incredible person. It's impossible for God to hate somebody like Sam.
Mm.
Meanwhile, you got on the other hand Christianity, the church, and the scriptures, and everything that heap up accusations and condemnation against Sam. And I'm like, okay, this makes total sense. Sam's a wonderful person. This makes they're arguing a point about Sam being depraved or whatever, and I couldn't put those two together. Now, I wasn't willing to dismiss the Bible and say it's all full of it, and I was unwilling to dismiss Sam. And so here we have this dichotomy. And one of my favorite theologians, Karl Barth, said the only way to solve a problem is not around it or above it or under it, but through it. And so I decided I'm going to figure this out. And it took me a while, but eventually I came to realize, like that moment where I saw everything as connected and included and one, and that love is kind of the glue that holds it all together. That's what makes sense to me. And the scriptures and all this, even though scholars are going to argue for ad infinitum about what the scriptures mean, I know love wins. In fact, one of my most controversial cartoons is Love Over Verses. And I believe that. I hold to that. I'm never going to let any scripture tell me who I can and can't love because that's not what love is. So, and I'll tell you a story. Something that happened that sort of illustrated this for me was I remember way back when I was in that struggle. Okay, there's no way God doesn't love Sam, but people are telling me that he doesn't. So, yeah, religious people are telling me that he does. So, what's going on here? And then I remember we'd made friends in seminary, and we're up here in Canada, and every year we'd go down and meet them in Bangor, Maine, and we'd get a hotel rooms, and we would hang out for the weekend. And Lisa and I and that couple. And one evening we went out for dinner and we were talking and everything. Uh, and at dinner we were talking about the struggle I was having because I was in the ministry at the
Yeah.
time. And they shared a house with uh, two lesbians that were
Mm.
in a relationship. And it was like, wow, that's like, wow, cool. And then we decided we went back to our room. We filled up our travel cups with wine and went down the hot tub. And so we were just sitting around the hot tub, and then these couple guys joined us, and we were just talking, and we were just talking about what we did. And the guy said, "Well, so what do you do?" And my friend said, "Well, I'm an editor, and at a book publishing company." And he said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a pastor." And the other guy got up and left. He said, "You'll have to excuse him. Um, he has a hatred for pastors and churches and stuff."
Mm.
Because he said we're a same sex couple, and we were in a church and everything, and we were kicked out when we were found out that we were gay. Um, and the church made sure that we couldn't get furnace oil delivered to our house. People won't serve us. We can't get pizza delivered to our house and blow. And I'm like, my mind is blown that people can be so cruel to these wonderful men that we just met and had a nice long conversation with. And it was like that. That for me cemented the deal that love wins. And if religion can treat people like that, then it's not true religion, right? It's kind of like James. True religion is taking care of widows and orphans. It's hands-on, actually caring for people. It's not, upholding religious beliefs. True religion is caring for people. And so that for me was the deal breaker when that happened to us in the hot tub over, travel mugs of wine, you know?
That's it's a moving story, and
Yeah.
growth happens in a myriad of ways. So it's very
Well,
interesting
that's
to
what I'm
hear.
talking about.
Yeah.
Like I could have read 20 books on, being queer and Christian,
Yeah.
but that experience was all I needed. And that is how I feel my growth and my learning happens is in moments like that. Kind of burning bush experiences, I call them, you
Yeah.
know?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, kind of a couple last questions for you. One is, you look back, obviously, Elliot, you said, talked about the story with the home or unhoused man. You talked about this moment in the hot tub, a number of other in the books. I'm curious, if you look back at your experiences, what do you feel like was the hardest moment? Not necessarily the most defining, because this happened over time, but is there a moment you look back and go, "Wow, that was really, really extra tough moment for you as you kind of went along this journey and probably continue on this journey and overall"?
Well, I think some of the most difficult moments in my life, and I can think of two, and they're related. One was when I went through a church split. I was the pastor, and my church split, and that was horrendous. Realizing just how easily betrayal can happen
Mm.
overnight. And then the same thing happened when I was fired from a ministry. I was taken on a ministry, and the spiritual leader of the ministry, very famous, and loved me and Lisa and loved the way I pastored my style. And I planted a church for them in this town, and uh, which is still going. But I was fired because for insubordination because I didn't do everything he asked, and anyway, without getting into the nitty gritty,
Yeah.
those things, those moments, the church split and then getting fired from a ministry, that sense of betrayal, when my I was trying to be the most authentic self and true to myself and keep my integrity, and it cost me. And I think that was the hardest lesson. Like, we see it all the time. We're seeing it right now in politics where people are are willing to sacrifice their integrity in order to keep their job or stay in good graces to the leader or whatever. Like I know that pressure. I know that pressure firsthand because my life dramatically changed after those moments when the church split and when I was fired. And it cost me financially, relationally, my family, everything. And so those were the hardest lessons to learn that if you want to keep your integrity, sometimes it's going to cost you a lot. And that seemed to me, well, that was one eye open. The other eye that opened about those was that this is happening in the church. Like seriously, like that's what those were the hardest lessons.
On a totally different angle, throughout your journey, do you have any favorite piece or pieces of artistry that you've put together, whether it be an entire book you've written, a cartoon, something prior to the cartoons, more in your painting and kind of different form world? I'm just curious if you have something that, like, looking back, is your favorite.
Uh, well, one of my most popular cartoons is Overturning, and it shows Jesus sort of in Matrix style, spreading out his hands, and the tables and coins are flying everywhere where he's
Right.
overturning the tables
Yeah.
of the money changers. That for me is a very popular cartoon right now because I think people are feeling that in their bones that it's time to turn tables over because of you know um, the amount of injustice that's going on and and it's I love that cartoon too because it's just full of action and um, it just seems to speak to our time right now. Uh, and then in terms of paintings, I have a painting called "Carrying My Inner Child to Safety," and it's a picture of a person carrying a small child through a snowstorm, and that speaks a lot to me because and to a lot of people because um, I feel taking care of our child, inner child, is trying to find and keep our most authentic self intact, keep our integrity, is taking care of that inner child. So I think those are the ones that are speaking to me the most right now. And then, I have images of Christ like refugees, where, uh, it shows Jesus as a refugee. And I just find that really timely right now.
And your story is so moving. As a final thought, before I just want to ask where people can follow your work and get in contact, is what amazed me reading a lot of it was just the accessibility for people who maybe aren't even religious. Maybe this specific journey of self discovery isn't something they experience, but it to some extent feels ubiquitous with other things that go on in people's lives, and really is a wonderful, vulnerable story that I'm so thankful for you sharing and being willing to talk through it. Really is a moving,
Oh,
it's a moving experience.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a human experience. Like all these problems that we're talking about, inner
Yeah.
child, justice, integrity, authenticity, all these things. It's a human problem. It's a human issue, human story. Religion plays a role in many of our lives. In some people's lives, it doesn't.
Mm.
But it's still, our journey is still very, very much the same. And that's what it's been for me is this whole religious journey of mine has really brought me to a place of being more human, you know? And so I think that's everybody's journey, is just becoming more authentically human. And whatever your journey looks like, whether it goes through religious terrain or not, if you're becoming more authentically human, I think that's the goal. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's a perfect place to kind of come to a conclusion on the discussion, and really appreciate everything. If people want to follow your work, they want to get in contact, what are the best ways to do that?
Yeah, so if you do want to get in contact, I'm really good at responding to like messages and comments and emails. So I'm at nakedpastor.com, and that's basically base camp for me. And but you can find me on all social media, including Substack. Instagram is probably my most active account, and I keep that the safest because it's the easiest to keep the safest.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all across social media. So feel free to reach out, and I'll respond. Follow me. That would be great.
Thank
Thank
you so much again for being willing to share these stories. It means a lot, and I appreciate all of the lessons I've learned, and I think other people will learn too.
Thanks, Jordan. I enjoyed our conversation.
Well, we will wrap it there. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Make sure to tune in next month for our next episode. And with that, we will call it a day.